The maternity ward was quiet in that particular way that only hospitals ever are, filled with soft footsteps, distant beeping machines, and the muted cries of newborns echoing down long white corridors. The young woman lay weak but awake on the narrow bed, her arms trembling slightly as she cradled her newborn for the first time. She was exhausted, emotionally drained, and painfully aware that her life had just changed forever. What she did not expect was that the very place meant to protect her in her most vulnerable moment would become the stage for humiliation and cruelty. Her mother-in-law stood near the door, arms crossed tightly against her chest, her lips pressed into a thin, unforgiving line. From the moment she had arrived, her presence felt heavy, like a storm cloud that refused to pass. She did not congratulate the new mother. She did not admire the baby. Instead, her eyes scanned the room with judgment, as though searching for faults. When she finally spoke, her voice was sharp and loud enough to draw attention from the hallway. "This is enough," she snapped. "You've embarrassed our family long enough. You don't belong here." The young woman blinked, unsure if she had heard correctly. She had just given birth hours earlier. Her body ached, her mind was foggy, and her heart was fragile. "What do you mean?" she asked quietly, tightening her hold on the baby. "I mean exactly what I said," the older woman replied coldly. "Pack your things. As soon as they discharge you, you're leaving. You're not coming back to our house. My son made a mistake, and now we're all paying for it." Nurses paused at the doorway, sensing tension but unsure whether to intervene. The young mother's cheeks burned with shame. Tears welled in her eyes, but she forced herself not to cry. She had learned long ago that crying only gave her mother-in-law more power. "You're heading to the wrong station," the older woman added bitterly, her words dripping with contempt. "This family is not your destination." Before the young woman could respond, the door opened again. Footsteps entered the room, steady, confident footsteps that did not hesitate. A tall man in a tailored coat walked in, his expression calm but firm. The mother-in-law froze mid-sentence. Her face drained of color as recognition hit her like a blow. It was the hospital administrator, accompanied by the woman's husband and a legal representative. The air shifted instantly. "I believe there's a misunderstanding here," the administrator said evenly. "This patient is under our protection, and any form of harassment will not be tolerated." The husband stepped forward, his voice shaking with anger. "Mom, stop. Right now. You have no right to speak to her like that, especially not here." For the first time, the mother-in-law had nothing to say. Her mouth opened, then closed again. The confidence she had carried moments earlier vanished, replaced by stunned silence. She looked around the room, suddenly aware of how many people were watching. The legal representative cleared his throat. "Any attempt to force this woman out, threaten her, or deny her access to her child can have serious legal consequences." The mother-in-law stood motionless, her authority stripped away in seconds. Without another word, she turned and left the room, her footsteps far less certain than when she had arrived. The young woman exhaled shakily, tears finally spilling over, not from humiliation this time, but from relief. That same day, far away from the quiet tension of a maternity ward, another confrontation was unfolding, this time under bright studio lights and rolling cameras. Chris Daughtry sat across from Kelly Clarkson on her talk show, the atmosphere initially light and friendly. The audience laughed, clapped, and waited for another entertaining celebrity interview. But as the conversation shifted, something changed. A comment was made, offhand to some, but deeply personal to Chris. His posture stiffened. His jaw tightened. He tried to respond calmly at first, choosing his words carefully, but it was clear the topic had struck a nerve. Kelly, surprised by his reaction, attempted to steer the conversation back, but the damage was already done. "I don't think this is funny," Chris said, his voice steady but strained. "You're crossing a line." The room fell quiet. The audience sensed the tension immediately. Kelly looked taken aback, trying to explain herself, but Chris shook his head. "No," he said firmly. "I came here to talk about my work, not to be put on the spot about things that matter deeply to me." He stood up slowly, adjusting his jacket. Cameras zoomed in as whispers spread through the studio. "I'm done," he added. "I won't be part of this." Without waiting for applause or a farewell, Chris Daughtry walked off the stage. The audience sat stunned, unsure whether they had just witnessed a misunderstanding or a powerful moment of self-respect. Kelly remained seated, visibly shaken, attempting to regain control of the show as producers rushed in behind the scenes. In both places, the hospital room and the television studio, the same truth had revealed itself. There are moments when silence is no longer an option. Moments when standing up, walking away, or having someone step in changes the entire balance of power. For the young mother, it was an unexpected guest who restored her dignity when she had none left to fight with. For Chris Daughtry, it was the choice to leave rather than tolerate disrespect. By the end of the day, two very different stories shared the same lesson. No matter how vulnerable, famous, or ordinary a person may be, there is a line that should never be crossed. And when it is, the consequences can leave even the most confident aggressor completely speechless. The smell of antiseptic hung in the air, mixing with the faint warmth of new life that only a maternity ward can hold. The young woman lay propped against stiff white pillows, her body sore and her mind overwhelmed. Hours earlier, she had endured the longest night of her life, bringing a child into the world through pain, fear, and hope. Now, instead of peace, she faced something she had come to dread for years, the cold, unrelenting gaze of her mother-in-law. The older woman entered the room without knocking, heels clicking sharply against the tiled floor. She did not smile, did not glance at the newborn sleeping quietly beside his mother. Her attention was fixed on the woman in the bed, as if she were an inconvenience rather than family. With a dramatic sigh, she set her handbag down and folded her arms. "So this is it," she said, her voice carrying authority. "You think having a baby makes you part of this family?" The young woman felt her throat tighten. She had learned to endure these moments in silence, but exhaustion made her defenses weak. "I just gave birth," she whispered. "Please, not now." "That's exactly why now," the mother-in-law snapped. "You planned this. You trapped my son. And now you expect to stay under our roof like nothing happened." The words hit harder than any physical blow. The young woman stared down at her child, afraid that even looking up would cause her to break. Nurses passed by the door, sensing tension but hesitant to interfere in what looked like a family matter. The mother-in-law took a step closer. "You'll leave as soon as you're discharged," she continued. "Go wherever you came from. This was never your station. You're running to the wrong platform." Tears blurred the young woman's vision. Her hands shook as she held her baby closer, her heart racing with fear and humiliation. She was weak, dependent, and trapped in a place where she should have felt safe. For a moment, it seemed as though the older woman's cruelty would go unanswered. Then the door opened. A man in a dark suit stepped inside, followed by the young woman's husband. Behind them stood a hospital supervisor. The sudden change in the room was immediate and unmistakable. The mother-in-law turned, irritation on her face, but it vanished the moment she realized who had entered. "What's going on here?" the supervisor asked calmly, though his tone left no room for excuses. The husband moved to his wife's side, his eyes filled with regret and determination. "I should have stopped this long ago," he said quietly. Then he turned to his mother. "You don't get to do this anymore." The mother-in-law opened her mouth, ready to argue, but the man in the suit spoke first. "Any attempt to intimidate or remove this patient from a safe environment is a serious violation. We've documented everything." For the first time, the older woman faltered. Her authority, once so absolute, crumbled under the weight of witnesses and consequences. She stood frozen, her face pale, her confidence evaporated. Without another word, she grabbed her bag and left, the sound of the door closing behind her echoing like an ending. The young woman let out a shaky breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her husband squeezed her hand. In that moment, she felt something new: protection, validation, and the beginning of freedom. Elsewhere, under the glare of television lights, another confrontation was unraveling before a live audience. Chris Daughtry sat across from Kelly Clarkson, the atmosphere warm at first, filled with laughter and friendly banter. The two shared a history, a mutual respect built on years in the music industry. But as the conversation shifted, the tone changed. A question was raised, one that touched on personal loss and private pain. Chris's smile faded. His shoulders stiffened as he tried to respond with grace, but the discomfort was obvious. The audience grew quiet, sensing the shift. "That's not something I want to joke about," Chris said, his voice controlled but heavy. "That crosses into something very personal." Kelly looked surprised, attempting to clarify, but the moment had already passed. Chris shook his head slowly. I came here in good faith, he continued. But I won't sit here and feel exposed for entertainment. He stood up, the movement deliberate and final. Gasps rippled through the studio. Producers whispered urgently behind the cameras. I'm done, he said simply. With that, Chris Daughtry walked off the stage, leaving silence behind him. Kelly remained seated, visibly shaken, trying to gather her thoughts as the show abruptly shifted into damage control. Viewers at home watched in disbelief as a polished talk show moment turned into an unscripted display of boundaries and self-respect. Though separated by circumstance, the two events shared a powerful connection. In both cases, someone was pushed to the edge, humiliated, cornered, and underestimated. And in both cases, the balance shifted when intervention or action replaced silence. For the young mother, an unexpected arrival transformed her fear into strength. For Chris Daughtry, walking away was a statement louder than any argument. The day ended with two lessons written in very different places. Dignity is not something anyone has the right to take, and sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is refuse to stay where they are not respected. By nightfall, the maternity ward returned to its quiet rhythm, and the television studio moved on to its next segment. But for those who witnessed what happened, whether in person or through a screen, the message lingered. Power does not always belong to the loudest voice in the room. Sometimes, it belongs to the one who knows when enough is enough and has the courage to act.